Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to Wake the Future. I'm Jared. This is Erica. And today we're coming to you with a topic that we find really, really interesting, and we think you will too. And we call it tug of war.
So we are feeling very cozy by the fire over here. And one of the things that has been rattling around in my head for the better part of the last handful of months is that we talk so much about the pace of change and that all of these things are happening faster than ever before. And it's almost as if we need to pause and say, is the pace of change even in every aspect of our lives? And the fact is, no, right? Like change feels very fast in certain areas of our lives and very slow and even painfully slow in other areas of our lives. And in just kind of stripping away the layers of this and thinking about it in much more kind of simplistic terms, the visual that came to me when really starting to get my head around this concept was that of tug of war, right? The childhood game that I played at recess, that you played, that our son plays at recess, right? And when you think about it, on one end of this rope, right, pulling so tightly is everything happening with AI. AI is now almost leapfrogging itself, right? The pace of change is so great in all of these aspects of our lives. And you hear about how AI is transforming everything from health, medicine, wellness, all of the incredible moonshots that could happen when AI combines with other really innovative technologies. Enter from stage left, right? Quantum computing, quantum mechanics. You layer on top of that synthetic biology and 3D printing and all of these things, right?
Insane,
that you're like,
insane.
are we living in some sort of utopian or dystopian sci-fi movie, however you really view it and define it? And all of these things where you're like, am I living in the year 2050?
Yeah.
Right? All of these things are changing. But then at the other end of the rope are all of those old ways of doing things.
Yep.
And it's kind of like these parallel realities where it's like we have 2050 over here and then 1980 over here, where even from a work perspective, right, so many things remain unchanged. The fact that we have no idea even how to regulate or legislate around any aspect of AI, right? It's like bureaucracy and red tape and all of these industrialized era holdovers where we're like, why are we still doing it this way? And I think for the average person, and I know that I feel this, and I think even for a lot of people in a work setting, and we'll dig into what it means, right, for families and individuals, but it's like, what direction do I go in? You know, that rope in the middle, right? It's like we're just kind of wavering back and forth between
Over the pit. You know how you pull people into the mud pit?
Yeah.
What we're looking at here is that two things can be true at once.
Mhm.
Everything is changing and nothing is changing. And so, you know, you and I nerd out about this all the time, but I think that really trying to figure out a way to conceptualize that is important. And just like with pilot versus passenger and all the other themes we're going to introduce, I think the goal in part is to take some really complex things happening out there and simplify them into almost childlike terms. So tug of war really resonates with us. I know that's kind of your baby. You came up with the tug of war concept, but I love it because it's really what's happening here. It's technology, it's modernity, it's progress, and on the other side is everything bringing us backwards. Now, we can take this conversation in a way that is we can have this as a political conversation, but of course we're not going to do that here today because we don't want to get into that minefield. But basically, all of the tension between tomorrow and yesterday that we're seeing politically is exactly what we're seeing technologically and how people are trying to adapt to day-to-day life.
And part of digging in your heels at that one end, which again, right, is very industrialized era holdover.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as like clocking in at 9, clocking out at 5.
Yeah.
It was a time that prioritized efficiency, productivity. We even talk, right? It's like we sit here in our day-to-day about the fact that like for so many decades, we were taught as humans and as workers, as basically cogs in the machine, to be more machine-like.
Yeah.
And there's almost a preservation of that status quo by those that don't want the future to pass them by.
That's right.
Which is why it's like, all right, here are the metrics you need to follow. This is what makes you a valued worker. This is how to eke out different levels and more levels of productivity. And those are holdovers from another time, an old economy, an old way of doing things. But we're not quite yet at that other end of the spectrum.
You're going to make me drink.
Yeah. And everyone is then trying to figure out, right? if the machines are out machining us, then what is our value proposition? And then we are just toggling between these different ways of working, these different ways of understanding the world, as you said, which is spot on. It's like two things can be true at the same time.
And more than
We're
two
not
things can
wired
be
to
true.
think
Like
that way.
many things are true at the same time. And unfortunately, we're at this point, you know, we struggle with this professionally sometimes because you walk into a room or I walk into a room and we're sitting there talking to, you know, a head of innovation or a head of strategy or a CEO. And they're like, tell me what the future is going to look like. And you know, it's basically like, we can't do that for you. We can help guide you, you know, and I think part of why we're doing Wake the Future is so that we can basically serve as chaos guides for individual people and for families, because there's no way to predict where it's going. So you just have to kind of be ready for whatever might happen. So a lot of things are true at once. And I think everyone is feeling that ping pong ball effect, that pinball effect. The most interesting way, I think, of contextualizing this is the idea that so much of our world, so much of our existence as human beings has changed dramatically, but it doesn't look that way.
Right.
Cosmetically, superficially, it doesn't look like much has changed at all. So I always tell people, if we were to stop the clock in the second half of the 19th century, let's say around 1875, so in this country, maybe 10 years after the Civil War, and you stop the clock then and you look around and you take someone from 1875 and you put them in a time machine and bring them to, like, let's say middle of the 20th century.
Plop them in the DeLorean
1950, 1960, their minds would be, they'd be blown, because they'd be like, what is that in the sky? What are these mechanized things that are taking everyone around? Electricity, photography, everything about our planet was fundamentally different in the course of 50 or 75 years, and it looked that way. I mean, imagine someone going to New York City in 1960 from the year 1875 and being like, there is a city that looks like this with buildings that are that tall. It's like mind-blowing. Aviation, all of it. So I think about that. Now think about someone who lived in like 1950, 1960, stopping the clock, bringing them in a time machine and dropping them off in 2025. Honestly, outside of stylistic things like the style of cars or the way that people dress and carry themselves, and of course the fact that we all walk around with this tiny little thing in our pocket that we stare at all day, everything else generally looks the same. Half the people I know who live in houses that were built between 1920 and 1950. You know, I mean, basically the way that society is structured physically looks very similar. Architecture's changed a little bit. You could go to like Dubai and be like, now there is the next evolution of a city, parts of China. But basically, the 75 or so years between 1875 and 1950, the change was palpable. It was tangible. And now we live in a time when change is so dramatic, but you almost can't see it. You just can't see it.
It's invisible change.
Someone would see it. It's invisible change. Someone, you know, I remember growing up in the 80s, you had these utopian and dystopian views of what the future was going to look like. And they all put a pin down like right now.
Right.
You know, whether it's Back to the Future or the Terminator, or the list goes on and on and on. And you're sitting there, the Running Man, you're sitting there, and elements of all those things have come true. But you're sitting there looking at that, and everything looks a certain way. It looks different. It looks like, you know, Blade Runner.
But it's like these very colliding timescales, right? And it's like you look at even current sci-fi and look at the environment that Black Mirror takes place in. Technologically, that is probably decades from now. But stylistically, it looks very much like probably the 90s. It's very simplistic. But then you even think of the movie Her. Right, that like the aesthetic and even the way that Joaquin Phoenix dressed, it was very kind of late 70s vibe.
Right.
And then he had his whole relationship with
and think
AI
about that.
And
you know, Erica and I are going to make references to pop culture movies and things like that all the time. And every time we see something interesting, there are nuggets of it that we pull forward years later and we're like, that is proving to be true. Or maybe it was a cautionary tale and it's proving not to be true. But
even
elements of these things all, like Her is a great example. A movie about someone who has a romantic relationship, an intimate relationship with AI. And we're seeing that starting to play out in the real world now, but that's not something someone dropped out of the sky into 2025 would even recognize as a feature of society unless they were to do research and really dig in. It's not visible. And so the change that you talk about, this tug of war is between everything is the same or even a push towards the way it was, to everything is different and will never be the same. And how do we,
But it's almost
as
this
organisms, get
clash,
around that?
right? So it's like one of our other favorite movies, the cult classic Office Space. And right, the logical brain would think, okay, in a time of AI or open work plans and all of these things that we thought were going to completely revolutionize work and what we knew, there are still facets of that
Yeah.
are all across the country, right? Cubicles, or it's like, where's my stapler? And all of these things. We're like, haven't we evolved past that? But we're almost stuck in this interstitial space in the middle. We feel like we are, again, like a pinball, where, like, even in our home right now, where we don't have smart technology, we by design have no Alexa, no Ring Cam, no any of these things. But we're very much living as much in 2026 as we are in 1996.
Yeah.
But then what we are learning about, studying about, speaking about, thinking, all of these things could be putting us 20 years in the future.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, they feel like a hamster in a wheel in this gap, right? Knowing that the statistic out there, 49% of the that the skill sets we currently have in the year 25 to 26 are likely going to be completely outdated. And I think that's actually a conservative estimate by the year 2030. Then we're like, how do we compete? What do we do? But then we still go to work and it's like, well, it feels pretty industrial, still not industrialized, but like industrial era, right? Which is just how we've always been taught to work. It's how we've been educated. And you even think of the school system, right? It's like maybe at home kids have access to tools or they're playing around with AI, but then the school day, the hours are still industrial. The way they're taught is still largely industrial. The school year is an industrialized era holdover. And I think that we are, if you want to talk about kind of that inflection point that we're at right now, it's not just that change is happening quickly. It's that almost psychologically and biologically, like, we are not primed to adapt and adjust that quickly because we just can't, and there's nothing wrong with us.
And this is
we're
one
not
of the
technology.
Things, this is one of the things that I feel very strongly about philosophically, and I hear people from the technology world saying, giving kind of a narrative that I actually very much disagree with. They put forth that humans are evolving in real time along with technology. Now, in some ways, I think that we are kind of agile and plastic enough to be able to evolve in real time. But in other ways, biology is biology. Evolution is evolution. The idea that we can, in real time, evolve alongside this technology so that in 1 to 2 generations, we are fundamentally changed as a species, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Now, you can argue that we see a lot of things happening intergenerationally and within 1 or 2 generations with the rewiring of adolescent brains or pre-adolescent brains. We're going to have other modules that talk about kids and gaming and all that stuff. But fundamentally, as a species, it's going to take us a lot longer. So when technology is speeding up like this, we're on 2 curves here. I mean, you've got curve 1, which is like this, and you've got curve 2, which is kind of like this. And that gulf between those 2 lines is kind of that space we're sitting in. It's that uncomfortable hammock.
That's the best way to put it. It is.
It's like a hammock visually, and it's uncomfortable. But it needs to be reconciled. Like, we have to talk through this stuff. I'm going to pay you a very nice compliment here. Anyone watching this knows, obviously, at this point, that aside from being colleagues, we're husband and wife. Happy wife, happy life. So I like to
see. After all these years,
I've been trained really well. I've been trained really, really well, like a show dog.
He knows what's up.
So no, but I'm going to pay you a compliment here. You've said some brilliant things there, and one of the things that I want to pick up on, you talked about what's going on in the office. You talked about what's going on at school. You could look at this in different sort of areas of life, different arenas. So you have the home, you have the workplace, you have the places of learning, and on and on and on. And you realize that stuff has changed dramatically, but it hasn't at all. The workspace as it still exists today hasn't changed really much at all. The biggest change I could see, aside from the move towards virtual work, which has taken many steps forward since COVID, but obviously a lot of companies are pulling back on it now, is the fact that you had more open work plans. Like, let's lower the walls of cubicles and make things more sort of collective and have everyone be
great
together.
In theory, not always in practice.
Now, for some businesses and some industries, that has worked really well, and in others, it doesn't work at all. Now, you and I have always talked about this. there is a clear divide in a world that is populated by a lot of extroverts and a lot of introverts in terms of what preferences are. And I'm keeping this right now in the workplace.
Yeah.
Everyone that we work with, for the most part, because they're senior leaders at companies, tend to be, on average, more extroverted than introverted. That's kind of part of why they got to where they are.
Right.
And a lot of our friends are that way. Extroverts are great being in open work plans because they can interact with more people and have the kinetic energy of like pinballs.
Yeah.
Introverts might get their best work done working remotely and not having to deal face to face with the uncomfortability of conversations like we're having right now. And in a world where more and more people, particularly young men, are coming of age on platforms and gaming and don't necessarily want to deal with face to face interactions, the old way of working where we had silos, we had cubicles, is probably going to become more in vogue again. And you think about it from a learning perspective. What you just said is absolutely true. Classrooms basically look the same. The school day looks the same. Everything looks the same. The only difference is that kids, they might have a tablet or they might have a Chromebook. And basically, they're utilizing that technology in the classroom at the same desks with the same windows and the same lack of air conditioning in the same buildings that
same
their
standardized
parents
testing.
went to school in,
Yeah.
their grandparents went to school in. So you realize that there is massive change and none at all. And that is such an interesting dichotomy. And of course, we're going to bring a lot of this as we have this conversation back to the home, because that's really what Wake the Future ultimately is all about. But I mean, I love the way you phrase that about these different arenas of life.
But even personally, you know, I think it's one of the reasons why, from like a brand perspective, as adults, we're finding and kind of clinging to whatever those objects are to make us feel comfortable as we are in, as you said, this gulf, right? Because we don't know what to adapt to, what to adjust to, what the future is going to look like, the fact that there are multiple futures, all of these things, right? And we're like, shit, can we just stop the clock? And it's why, like, a lot of these brands, fast food brands, like any ad you see on TV right now, I mean, we might love it because it's all of the music of our youth. It's like hearkening back to the 80s, the 90s, which is my sweet spot. But it's like it's tapping into a sense of nostalgia. A lot of the shows that are then going back to prior times, it's by design. And it is a way to then basically say, like, yeah, like that is your security object. And I think we're going to be seeing that more and more.
And you know, here's the thing. I mean, some of that is cyclical. Nostalgia is a cyclical thing. Nostalgia and pop culture is a cyclical thing, but not all of it. So, for example, you take something like Stranger Things. I mean, and I'm not fully caught up, you are. Stranger Things really was playing into, it was tapping into a deep sense of nostalgia for people in our generation, Gen Xers or early millennials.
No spoiler alerts.
In the 80s that they grew up in. And what happened, it ultimately is because it had a young cast. It started to appeal to younger people and give them a sense of that nostalgia almost secondarily. And, you know, I have this, look, I grew up as a huge fan of Karate Kid, unapologetically. One of my favorite movies, and Cobra Kai came out. And it was one of the best moments of my adult life outside of anything going on with my family. I mean, they're re-releasing this with these guys. My memorabilia, my signed piece of Ralph Macchio and William Zabka went up about 50 times in value after they started that show. But that was a young cast, and it introduced a whole generation of younger people to something that was very nostalgic for their parents. Ultimately, I think nostalgia is there for a reason, and it's more powerful now than even in previous generations because it provides a tether to simpler times.
But look at how the consumer product space is evolving.
Absolutely.
Like even when it comes to kids, like we were just talking the other day about those corded phones. I mean, granted, they use like you still need to use internet. It's like a VoIP thing. But right, it's like people still miss the tactile, the sensory, that feeling of it's like the hashtag IRL. Right, there's a reason that is coming up alongside of everything that is happening.
And vinyl records. I mean, basically all of these things that they're pinball machines. We already talked about pinballing as a concept
metaphorically.
Metaphorically, pinball machines, actual pinball machines, are in vogue again, and there are arcades opening up that are, you know, I think very interesting to kids because they're in such a two-dimensional world that the three-dimensional components of some of these things that existed when we were growing up do become interesting retroactively. So again, it's this gulf we're living in.
Because, right, like I think this is what a lot of parents are struggling with. And I speak for both of us when I say like, we're trying to figure this out. It's
Yep.
like toggling between, like, on the one end of that rope, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what tools should I be giving my kid? I don't want them to fall behind. And at the same time, then there's almost like a off the grid movement.
Yep.
Even reading about the fact that Australia will be the first country under 16 to ban social media, and that's its own, obviously, future
Yeah.
episode.
But I mean, this has
But
been
then
going
it's
on for
like
years. What China was doing,
physical
going back
products.
many, many years with limiting, mandating limitation to times that kids would be on gaming
Yeah.
platforms, addiction camps in China and South Korea. Other countries have been dealing with elements of that before. The United States, we tend to have this ego as Americans that everything's happening here first because we do tend to innovate the technologies first. But the adoption curves, and we can use other countries often
Right.
kind of as harbingers for where we're headed. And so, what to your point, like there's definitely there's a movement and a counter movement now. In our nerdy world as futurists, we talk about trend and counter trend.
Yeah.
Here's the problem: is that you can try to reconcile two things at once, but sometimes, especially if you're making parenting decisions, if you go too far down one path, it becomes very hard. Like if you cast that reel, if you're fishing and you cast that reel out there, it becomes very hard to pull it back if that reel gets caught in like in a major current. And that's kind of what's happening. And we're gonna have another episode all about this kind of stuff. But I think about parents who have kind of let technology take the wheel from the time their kids are 1 or 2 years old. And then all of a sudden they have an epiphany when their kid's like 11 or 12 that maybe I should be pulling back. And honestly, from what I've seen in most cases, then it's too late. So you almost have to make a conscious decision earlier
Right.
to reconcile these two things and figure out a strategy which is going to be more adaptive to this gulf between where we're headed and where we've been.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Because again, there's no roadmap, and everyone is craving a roadmap.
Right.
Everyone wants, whether it is like their tech assistant, their smart assistant to tell them what to do, right? Default a
Yep.
lot of their thinking to technology, or go so much in the other direction, where again, everyone is trying to figure out what this means, both in their own home for their kids.
Yep.
And I think this tug of war analogy applies. You were kind of talking about the different layers of it, from work to school. There's obviously a generational tug of war that's happening. There's a political tug of war. There is also, which is a narrative that is totally unfounded. And again, we'll get into this in another episode, which is that tug of war between kind of humanity writ large
Yeah.
and
yeah.
technology
That's the
and
big one.
AI. And the big one where everyone
big
is
one.
then trying to figure out that gulf where it's like,
Yeah.
how do I stay relevant?
Yes.
How do I keep my skills fresh? How do I am I going to have a job?
Yes.
What is the future going to be for my kid when I don't know which end of the rope is ultimately going to win out? And I think that is the biggest question.
Some of that is relevant here, though. Again,
Yeah.
I go back to let's start by going back to the learning space. So, a lot of the people who are really bullish on AI right now are talking about all the different sectors, job sectors that it could either, eliminate or partially replace. And I've heard people very recently talk about how in the next 10 to 20 years, they can see most teachers being replaced by artificial intelligence. I'm here to say that as a futurist, and again, I am probably much more of a bearish futurist about a lot of these topics and a lot of other people in our field who are
I
very
would also
bullish.
just say that you're
I don't
a
think
realist.
I don't think teachers are disappearing anytime soon. So to this point of these spaces are going to change dramatically to they're not going to change at all. We're talking about physical structures in schools that haven't changed much at all in 100 years, outside of the addition of some technology. And now we're postulating that human teachers are going to be gone in favor of AI or avatars or remote teachers. It's not going to happen. It might happen in cases.
Right.
It might happen to a degree. I'm not sitting here saying nope, but it's not going to happen to the extent where it's going to be a full takeover. And so you think
It's
about
like you have
these
the holographic teachers, right? Like we've seen
Right.
examples mostly in Asia of
holographic
the
doctors, remote doctors.
Yes.
I mean, it is happening, but it's not to the extent that I think people with extreme viewpoints. So again, it's a little bit of column A and it's a little bit of column B.
Right, but
And-
it's the same with AI. You read some of the statistics where like 96, what is the study that just came out of MIT? It was like 96% of generative AI pilots fail in the workplace, like
Yeah.
enterprise AI, because there isn't the vision to really understand how it's going to impact
Yep.
the company going forward. And that's again, like that flag over the
Yes.
pit, where then the average worker, the average person who just wants to go and do their job talk about WTF moments, is stuck in their own WTF cycle where
Yes.
they're like, what am I supposed to learn? What am I supposed to do? You're telling me to still do it the old way
Yep.
in some facets of my job, and then you want me to quickly adopt new
That's
tools
right.
and then basically leapfrog everything that I've been trained to know. And then you hear all these things about the eventual death of the knowledge economy, which, save it for another day, like massive facets of that are going to go
You
away.
keep bringing up this tug of war analogy with the flag kind of oscillating and going from right to left to right to left. And, again, I'm going to
I
completely.
was always on the losing team of tug of war.
Of
as a
course,
kid, too.
I'm not surprised to hear that. But I do. I'm gonna completely reveal myself to be the Gen X meathead that I am, because we already talked about Karate Kid. Revenge of the Nerds, one of my favorite movies, a cancelable movie in today's climate. I think of the scene where the tug of war between the antiquated folks, the goons, the ogres, and the nerds, who kind of represent where the world was going. So that's actually probably the best metaphor for this. I know, isn't that great? Isn't that great? And but you can't even find that movie anymore on most of these platforms because it's been canceled.
No, trigger warnings.
Microaggressions, all that stuff. But the bottom line here is, again, let's talk about one of the key reasons we're doing Wake the Future is so that we can start to begin these conversations in ways that might be familiar or useful for you to all have, again, in your households or with your kids or as families. I'm thinking about this from the future of work and careers. So I want to cover two quick aspects of that.
Yeah.
Number one is the fact that, just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everyone, it is still very logical and it is still very practical to try to encourage STEM development among children, because the future is going to be STEM. It's going to be technological and all that. But everyone was being pressured into coding. Coding is the future. One of the promises of AI, especially when you think about large language models and all that nerdy stuff we're not going to get into right now, is that I would argue that in the near future, forget teachers being replaced by AI, but I could see a future where 80 to 90% of coders are replaced by artificial intelligence.
This is starting
that
to
can
happen
just do it better and smarter. Now, the very best, most innovative coders, certain people who are the best in their field, I don't think are going to disappear. So it's not all or nothing. But everyone is being pushed into coding. If we had this conversation 15 years ago and we had this, we were doing an episode of a podcast or whatever, and it was like, where's the future going? Get your son and daughter into coding right now. Now I would say absolutely not. Now, maybe you should have a rudimentary knowledge of coding because it is just like a baseline skill, like reading, writing, and
it's become easier, right? Because a lot of the tools, the no-code tools, are democratizing it. I mean, it's like people with very little tech savvy or even tech know-how can go in and use these pretty easy to use AI tools to figure out how to code.
That's the thing. It is becoming more democratized.
Not for everyone. I'm not coding.
I still think coding will have value, but not to the extent where everyone needs to learn how to code or they're not going to be able to participate in the economy.
Right.
So that is one. Now, the flip side to that, on that equation, is that we hear, and it is true, that in a world of AI where a lot of these jobs might be replaced, either totally or partially, we're going to have a resurgence of the trades. We're going to have a resurgence of, mechanics and general contractors, HVAC, plumbers, welders, electricians.
I mean, we've been banging that drum for so long. And everyone, remember, this is going back a decade plus when we were saying, the future is going to be about a lot of vocational training. And there was still such a myopia, right? It's like the blinders on for everybody, where it still was in traditionally white-collar fields where parents also feel really good investing in a college education if they know that their kids are going to come out as a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, and whatever, name the list, and finance.
I mean, but the thing is, I don't think this all got real until very recently. Because until very recently, look, we had already gone through a major transformation, automation on things like factory floors.
Yeah.
And we understood that a lot of quote unquote traditionally blue collar jobs were already kind of going by the way of technology. I don't think it became real for a lot of the people, including all the nerds that are in our world that speak about these things intellectually and work in offices or in the quote knowledge economy, until they realized, oh shit, my job or my function, it's coming for that now. So what ends up happening is now they understand there might be a premium paid for things like the trades. And so we are going to see a resurgence of the blue collar, of the trades. I also think that can't be exaggerated either, because if every single person went into the trades, then the value, the ability to earn an income and charge a
Right.
premium for being really good at HVAC or plumbing or general contracting, it goes away if the market is saturated with people who do that. So there has to be an
Mhm.
equilibrium. But bottom line, that's
Yeah.
one way I look at this. And another way I look at this, I was sharing with you, I saw a story just the other day about, we live in the Northeast and how exponentially greater percentages of kids from the Northeast are now enrolling in SEC
Mm.
colleges, Southeastern Conference. I had to explain that to Erica. She's not a college football fan. Frankly, I'm not a college football fan either. I love pro sports. I grew up in New York
Mm.
City, so I'm a pro sports guy. But I
I'm a Buffalo
explained,
Bills fan.
I had to explain to her that SEC basically is talking about all the big schools down in the southeastern part of the United States. I was reading this story, and some of it just seemed to intuitively make sense, that a lot of kids are starting to process that their job prospects after college are going to be very uncertain. And there's been this movement, and it's starting to swing back, this movement towards college is not worth it. It's not a worthwhile investment. A lot of these kids, and many of them are from more economically advantaged homes, and even ones who have to take out extensive loans, are basically saying to themselves, okay, you know what? I am going to go to college, and there is value. And part of the reason there is this perceived value, and you could kind of view this as a good thing or a sad thing, is that it is going to be, in their minds, one of their last opportunities to really enjoy their life
Mhm.
before they go into this void of uncertainty where they don't know what their career is going to be. They don't know if a job is going to be waiting for them. They might be saddled with debt, student loan debt, for the rest of their lives. So they're like, you know what? We're going to go to
Right.
big schools, fun schools. There are TikTok trends that have
Mhm.
basically driven enrollment to a lot of these schools. And so technology is fueling a resurgence in the interest in certain colleges that you would have argued 20 years ago might soon die out. But the reasons for it are mutated because of this world we're talking about of push-pull, modernity versus the way things were. And we're talking
Yeah.
about this as people who've had decades of life to try to intellectualize it. Imagine if you are a kid growing up in this and you're trying to figure it out. I mean, it's so
And you could
confusing.
argue, like, right, all of these generations have always been through uncertainty. Uncertainty is a part of being human. But I think that there's just so much conflicting advice out there right
Yeah.
now. Because again, you think of this push pull, and it's like in one ear, in multiple ears, it's like vocational in the trades. In another ear, it's AI, like specialize in AI,
Yeah.
whether it is the next iteration of prompt engineering, whether it is the next iteration of coding, whether it is even on track to become a chief AI officer,
Yep.
right? And then in the other ear is this resurgence of uh what I would kind of call not just the humanities, but like the human wisdom
Yeah. Bingo.
traits.
Yep.
And it goes beyond film studies and gender studies and all like the liberal arts. And it's more like, how are you studying around the things that make us uniquely human?
Yep.
I always love quoting David Brooks from the New York Times when he's like, major in being human in the future. And like, what does it mean to major in being human? And again, it goes beyond critical thinking, but then they hear it's like tap into emotional intelligence
Yeah.
and embracing ambiguity, right? Like, and then parents are like, great, I'm going to spend like $250,000 having my kid trying to understand nuance and the art of persuasion.
Yeah.
But all of these things that then on this other end of the spectrum also pulling tightly, it's like, what are all these things that AI is going to be incapable of doing? So in these kids' heads, they're like, again, WTF,
Yeah.
what direction do I go in?
Yes.
And then there's the direction that the parents, again, from another economy, another age, another way of learning, where it is a little bit more linear. And again, they're like, what am I investing in? Right? That's also another ear where they're probably like, you need a job, you need to make an income.
Yeah.
And all of this is basically like just rattled around. It's like in a centrifuge,
Well,
right? Where it's like, where am I
Also,
going?
again, I don't want to keep harping on the kind of, negative scenarios, but it's a practical scenario. You have more and more boomerangs than ever before. You have
Mhm.
more and more kids coming of age as young adults who don't have either employment or continuously reliable employment. And listen, I cut my teeth and grew up in New York City. And so a place where hardly anyone can afford to live now. And, the idea of being able to afford your own life without help from your parents, you have all these boomerangs, which means that in homes you have
Yeah.
multi-generations. In some cases you have 3 generations, including grandparents, who are just like, to kids, they're like relics. But you have three generations, all of whom have different attitudes and experiences with all the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So that disconnect generationally becomes a difficult one. Now, one of the reasons we're doing Wake the Future is remember, we talk about bringing common sense to uncommon times. It's like, what are some practical tips?
I remember.
Practical tips here. I mean, one of them that jumps to mind for me, and again,
Yeah.
I think some of these tips that we give are going to be almost so intuitive. It's like they're right in front of our face, but different generations of people, parents and kids, parents, kids and grandparents, grandparents and kids, every combination, permutation of this should be carving out time
Mm-hmm.
daily or weekly. It should be kind of part of the routine to sit and talk about these issues, talk about how they affect that individual household, what mommy and daddy do for work, what, your future might look like as far as a job or a career. And then talk sort of philosophically, because here's the other point. I said bingo before, because as you're talking about the trades, and then you're talking about becoming expert in STEM areas, far reaching like AI or quantum.
Yeah.
Those are two areas where people are going to be pushed to develop skill sets. But then there's also the resurgence of the humanities and things like philosophy and ethics,
Mm-hmm.
because the philosophy and ethics of technology, trust,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's such a
I am
huge
going
one.
to officially plug Erica's book from last year, which is a phenomenal book, AI and the New Human Frontier. Again, I'm not gonna turn this into an active pitch, although that book can be found on Amazon and everywhere books are sold. But I said in our intro video that's also up on our channel that Erica's book is very relevant. Is gonna come up from time to time because it is one of those books about AI.
Thank you.
Well, look, happy wife, happy life. I mean, this is what it's all about here. I'm not stupid. It is one of those books about AI that is not. It's timeless. It doesn't have an expiration date because it's really all about trust. We think about trust and how that is related to ethics and philosophy. I think there will be a resurgence in understanding those disciplines as they relate to AI and where we're going.
Like, we can talk about kids, we can talk about us as parents, but you mentioned grandparents, and you mentioned the other end of the age spectrum that I think almost feels this tug of war even more acutely. Because many of them had prided themselves on all of like the accumulation of knowledge and being smart was such an asset and all these things. And then they're like, wait, what? Like, what is happening in this world? And then you think about it from kind of a work perspective. And right, a lot of the companies we've worked with talk about the power of apprenticeship programs and the transference of institutional knowledge, right? It's like, someone that's been with the company for 40, 50 years has a lot of knowledge about the inner workings of the business, and that can transfer down to the younger employees. At the same time, we always talk about reverse mentorships and or even reverse apprenticeships. And if a 20-something knows more about AI than the CEO, how a lot of that communication has to flow both ways. And I think the same can be said, and you said it perfectly, in families, right? To foster those dialogues, not even just parent to kid, but it's like, if any of our listeners, like if their kids have grandparents, to just start having those conversations, have it be a two-way street. And again, I go back to what you said at the very beginning of this, which I think matters more than anything else. And that is the fact that we have to be able to hold divergent perspectives together in our own head. And that is so hard to do today. It's like you have all of this noise coming in, and most of that noise informs what you already think, right? It's very self-validating. And then we hear something that's counter and we dismiss it. And I think the more that we can have conversations about things that we don't agree with, you and I know we come across things and we're like, shit, that is messed up. But it's like you still have to look under the hood to be like, what is this telling me? What is the bigger story that's being told?
And you and I don't always agree with each other. In fact, that's part of what makes us. It gives us a healthy relationship, a healthy balance. Like, we agree, I think, the majority of the time, but there are other times where we even have different perspectives as we evaluate these things.
Absolutely.
So, but here's the thing, like you picked up the baton from what I introduced before and took it to a great place, because again, I think if we have these conversations, again, at like the kitchen table, and let's assume there are three generations there. In many cases, it may just be two, but let's assume there are three generations having these conversations. I think a good kind of a metaphor for this would be a one-lane road going in each direction with significant traffic. That information is going to be transmitted very slowly and painfully between two people who may have completely divergent perspectives and may not see eye to eye on what's going on in the world at all. I think about, what a 9-year-old who's running around screaming 6'7" and is really into K-pop is going to have a conversation, and an attention span that lasts about 8 seconds is going to talk to someone who is 75 or 80 about someone who is used to getting the newspaper in the morning and sitting and reading it for an hour and has a much different perspective on everything.
It might
That
even be interesting as you say this, because I love this visual. Even for someone with multiple children across different age horizons, because then it's like you paint a very accurate picture of a 9-year-old, and then
I mean,
uh,
we have an
I
8-year-old.
know.
I'm not far off
I
here,
know.
so
But then it's like, what would that conversation be with a 16-year-old
yeah,
or like a 22-year-old?
yes,
Right? It's like, because we know, we talk about this all the time from a nerdier perspective. It's like those generational time scales are also compressing,
yeah.
where it's not just like every 12 years. It's like different frames of reference.
They're like micro generations.
They're
I don't even think that
micro-generations.
the delineation of generations, like
No, it
what,
makes
it
absolutely
makes no sense because
sense.
generations can't be 15 years. Like giving you another little look under the hood here. I am technically a Gen Xer. Erica was born 2 years after me, is technically a millennial. I don't think either one of us fully categorizes ourselves as entrenched in either of those
But they
generations. We're in
kind of
that in
split
between.
78 to 82.
Yeah,
in
we're
its
in
own
that in
little
between,
micro.
you know. But I think the way I think about this visually, and again, this is just in real time in response to you, because like a lot of what you say inspires me to think about these things differently. It starts off as a 1-lane road in each direction that is jammed with traffic. You're moving
Yeah.
about 8 feet a minute until, and I think,
Imagine if you were actually.
oh man,
seven.
my stress levels since I downshifted from living in New York City to going elsewhere
To suburbia.
have gone down about 99%, except for my occasional road rage behind Subarus. But I digress. The fact of the matter is that's going to stay in the cut. But the fact of the matter is that I think the goal, if I could leave this conversation, leaving all of you with one practical tip, and I'm sure Erica might have something to add to this, it's the fact that if it starts off as that 1-lane road going in opposite directions with standstill traffic, the goal is to have enough of these conversations about where the world was, where the world is going, and coming to a common understanding so that we can navigate this more freely and more easily, so that eventually that becomes a 3-way highway in both directions and the cars are moving at 65 miles an hour. I think that's kind
I
of
love that. And
untrapping what we're thinking.
Yeah. And I would just layer on top of that, just kind of doing an audit. And it could be as easy and far more fun and interesting than an actual audit, but just even 2 columns as a family. And you can brainstorm ideas of like, what do we like to do in kind of the old way? It could be as simple as like one of our favorite games, Sorry, or Rummy Cube. It's like, what is something that's just kind of basic and simple and where we can just come together? And then what is one way where our thinking needs to evolve? It's like, what can we use AI to do? And again, it's not rocket science. It could be the simplest thing where it's like, maybe we use AI to just help us plan dinner for a week and give us a list of menu items. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be completely reinventing the wheel, but just to get comfortable, again, existing in these worlds and these ways of doing things that are not one size fits all and aren't catch-alls, right? Where it's like you can have one toe in this and one toe in that, and the fact that they coexist is good.
And it's going to be different for
comfort
every.
in the discomfort.
It'll be different for every one of you. It'll be different for every
100%.
family. I mean, I think of each one of yourselves or each one of your families as your own like Italian nonna. Like you make a recipe and each recipe is a little bit different. You sprinkle a little bit more of this, a little bit less of this. There's no one size fits all approach to this. But I think if you kind of view it as like we have to figure out how to infuse a little bit of both, a little bit of all, have these intergenerational conversations, challenge our perspectives, get a little bit more comfortable in this kind of void, or as I visualize it, like a hammock. I think that we're going to be just better positioned to be ready for the future. And that future could be tomorrow, it could be 5 years from now, it could be 10 years from now. But if we start disciplining ourselves to do this now, I think it'll be better for us. And again, even if someone doesn't have children, it shouldn't matter. It's still better for an individual person to try to figure out how to meditate around these things by themselves or with their partner. So I think that we're really at an interesting inflection point. And I think it's a very important conversation to have. And I credit you again because you're the one who really, the tug-of-war concept was your brainchild. And it's so simplistic, but it's so spot on here. So, I hope that for all of you watching this and joining us, that you take something from this. And one of the things that we're going to challenge all of you to do as you kind of follow along with us and become part of this community, and just share your own wisdom, because one of the things Erica and I want to do as we evolve this over time.
It's the collective.
Is we
this
wanna,
is a community.
It is. Like we're kind of spearheading this, but we want to integrate some cool things we hear from you into possible future conversations.
And we know what we're trying to figure out as a family, and it's different from what you might be trying to figure out as a family. So as Jared said, drop your comments below, make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Let's wake the future together. See you soon.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, like, follow, and subscribe to stay ahead of what's next. I'm Erica Orange.
And I'm Jared Weiner. Thanks for waking the future with us. We'll see you next time.